All right, and our lighting has finished being built, so let's jump back into our foliage mode here. I'm going to make sure I've got my rock foliage type selected, coming back down under our instance settings where we've got our shadow settings. And let's toggle some of these settings here and see what has resulted now that we have built the lighting. Well, obviously, if I uncheck my cast shadow option, we would expect that the shadows would go away, right? Well, partially. Half of them go away, the other half stays. What is going on? Well, let me just toggle this back on quickly. We actually have two different types of shadows being cast. Now remember, we've got two directional lights out here. We've got this directional light that we've just placed out here. Let me select that. I gotta jump out of foliage mode in order for me to actually select that, so I'm gonna jump into place mode momentarily. So there is the directional light actor that I just added. And if I scroll up in the details panel, we can see that this is set to be a stationary light. Now our other directional light actor, and let me just do a search for it in the world outliner. It is known as our light source directional light actor. If I select that one, this is set to be a movable light. This has an impact on the different shadow settings that we find here in our foliage mode. Coming back under our rock instance settings, cast shadow, our light source, the one that is set to be movable, that is casting what is known as a dynamic shadow. So if I toggle this off, the shadow from that light will disappear. And I actually got that backward. I thought originally when I added this light actor that this one was casting this shadow. I actually had that backwards, where the sunlight, the light source directional light actor, is casting this shadow, and this shadow out here is being cast by this directional light actor. Okay, so if a directional light is set to be mobility of movable, that is considered a dynamic light. Toggle that on and off. A static shadow is being cast from this stationary light right here. Now, if I toggle it off, you're like, well, why isn't it going away? And the reason is because we baked our lighting into the scene. Anytime we have a stationary light, such as this light actor right here, and then we build the lighting, it is going to bake that shadow into the scene, meaning that even if you try to toggle it off, it is going to stay out here. Now, the way you could fix that, if you truly didn't want this shadow, is you could have this turned off, and now if I was to rebuild the lighting again, what would happen is that this shadow that is coming from this light would disappear. Next, what I'd like to do is to simulate our game. That is to run our game without actually running our character around in our level, just so we can see how our shadows are behaving here, given our settings right here. Now, to simulate your game, you can come under your play button submenu, this little drop down arrow right here, and you've got the option to simulate your game by clicking right here, alternatively by doing the Alt and S hotkey. And if we go ahead and select this, what you'll see now out in our environment is, okay, we are running the game. That is, all scripts are being run. We're not controlling a character at all, although we can move around the camera a little bit. And you can see we've got our static shadow being cast out here. That's the one that got baked into our level from that directional light actor that had its settings, its mobility settings set to stationary, that was existing right about here. And then we've also got our dynamic shadow, which we're seeing moving dynamically as the sun moves around the sky back there. Now, this was from our light source directional actor, whose mobility was set to be movable. So dynamic shadow is coming from this light source. Let me just stop that again. Dynamic shadow is coming from this light source, who has its mobility set to be movable, and our static shadow is coming from this directional light source that has its mobility set to be stationary. Now, one final thing I wanted to talk about here in our foliage types instance settings was this collision preset. We currently have a rock foliage type in our level, and you would expect that if we were to jump in and play here that my character would collide with it, but that's currently not the case. And that is because our current collision preset for our rock foliage type is set to be no collision. Now, obviously, the fix here is to change your collision preset to something other than no collision. You've got this little drop down here, and I'm going to set this to be block all. Now, with it set to block all, if I click this little drop down arrow right here, you can see that when it's set to block all, it is going to block all of these different types of actors, these different channels, if you will. So currently, our third-person character that we're controlling in our world is considered a pawn. So with this set to block all, it is saying, hey, we want you to block the pawn. Now, just a quick note here, if I do have this set to be no collision, you'll still see it says block the pawn, but the collision enabled is set to no collision, so that's why you still don't get any collision. We're going to set this to block all now. I'm going to jump in and play, and now if I run my character into that rock, boom, he will collide against it. Now that seems simple enough, but I do need to point out one thing. In order for this block all collision preset to actually work, your static mesh itself must have collision on it. What do I mean by that? Well, let me show you a couple of different static meshes here. There is one in our starter content props. We've got in our starter content props folder this SM rock. I'm going to bring this guy open, dock it across the top here, and then I'm going to find our current rock mesh out here, this ground reveal rock, located in this directory. Going to double click on this guy and open it up. Now, we are currently looking at each of these through their static mesh editor, and there's this collision option up here. So if you show simple collision, complex collision, that is on our ground reveal rock. Now I'm going to do the same on our SM rock. Collision, show simple, show complex. Well, you see that it has complex collision, but it does not have simple collision. Now, that's a problem because if we were to have made this mesh for our foliage type rock be our static mesh rock from our starter content, we're talking this guy right here, our character would go right through that rock because currently our SM rock does not have any simple collision on it. Let me just turn off the complex collision for the ground reveal rock. So the simple collision is denoted by this green wireframe. Now, if I wanted to add collision to our SM rock here, maybe that's the one that you want to set as a foliage type out in your level. You got to make sure that you've got simple collision shown on here so you'll be able to see it when we do add it. And then you've got this collision option up here. And you've got different types of collision that you can add, and I'm not going to get too deep into this for the time being. But if I just do, let's do add 26 DOP simplified collision. This is going to be very inaccurate. But you can see how it now adds collision around that rock so you can collide with it. All you need to do then is save your static mesh with that collision, and that would make it so that when you do create a foliage type using that static mesh, and you do set it to block all, it will respect the block all. All right, guys, that is going to do it for this discussion on instance settings for your foliage types. That'll do it all for this one. We will see you in the next one.